when it was NCNM here in 1983. In 1994, he continued his education, earned a master's in Chinese medicine and acupuncture. And then after graduation, he bicycled 10,000 miles around the U.S. with 7 other naturopathic physicians, lecturing on health and nutrition. In 2015, he was inducted into the NUNM Hall of Fame, and he's currently the medical director for the Tabor Hill Clinic in Portland. So please welcome Dr. Russell Marz.
Okay, so first part of this talk is going to be gloom and doom, because I want to scare you people, because we need to respond sooner than later. So you heard Leaf speak about sustainable fish, and today you're going to hear Diana Rogers speak about sustainable meat. And I'm going to present the other side of that story. How many people know who Richard Oppenlander is? Richard Oppenlander wrote the book Comfortably Unaware. So you should write this down. I don't know if the reading list and movie list will be available. I know in the professional track it is. I'm assuming you're getting the same thing. Is that true? Okay, good. So it'll be on there. So Richard Oppenlander wrote another book called Sustainable Nutrition, Food Choice and Sustainable Nutrition. Probably the most amazing and well-researched book on sustainable nutrition that you're ever going to hear. And I was so excited when this conference came up as the name of it, Sustainable Nutrition, because I want to present to you what's happening in our current global environment. And it ain't pretty. So take out your Prozac or your Wellbutrin, take a little hit right now, because we're going to go down deep into the rabbit hole. Okay, first slide. So this is Elizabeth Colbert. She spoke about 7 or 8 years ago. She wrote this book called The Sixth Extinction, of which we are now in the midst of. So this is something like, it's hard for people to imagine that we're in this position right now, but we are. So right now, 150 to 200 species of plants, insects, and animals are going extinct every 24 hours. That's the fastest mass extinction since the first one. So we've had 5 of them to date. So that's pretty crazy.
It's people carrying out the most basic of human activities that's causing all these things that we share the planet with to disappear forever. It's hard to relate to that, to realize that just in these little life activities of ours, we're driving into oblivion these beautiful other life forms that have evolved for millions of years and that are our only known living companions in the universe.
And the main cause of this is actually the choices that we make about our food. And so that's what I'm going to present. The second half of the talk, we're going to get into what the ideal diet is and the blue zones. How many people have read Dan Buettner's book, Blue Zones? Oh, a few of you. Good, great. So Dan Buettner, I got a chance to meet with him. He gave a beautiful lecture back in Washington, D.C. last August. So I got a photo of him in the professional one. All right. So this is a very interesting little diagram. This is probably the most important diagram you're ever going to see. It's really, really important. You can see this slide is a representation of what existed for 100,000 years up until 10,000 years ago when humans first started their agricultural quest. So you can see the number or the mass of wild fauna was 200 million metric tons. So keep that number in your mind. Humans made up about 1 million humans at that time, 50,000 metric tons. So just a tiny little bit of the total mass of the planet. Okay, we're going to fast forward 1970. All of a sudden, in 1970, wild fauna goes from 200 million to less than half. Now they're at 80 million metric tons. Humans divide and conquer and go up to the same biomass as the megafauna, the wild fauna 10,000 years prior. So that's like, wow, we've totally taken over their whole existence. The livestock to feed humans was double that of the mass of humans at 400 million metric tons. So in 1968, the population bomb came out talking about how there's too many humans on the earth and we're going to ruin everything by over-multiplying, which is actually partially true, but not really. I'm going to show you why that's not true. So now we're going to fast forward just 40 years to 2010. Humans double in population in their mass in just 40 years. Like, that's like crazy. So there's a great video I usually show about the Matrix and about how basically humans are like a virus, a cancer to the planet, which is very true. But I'm going to show you the second half. You're going to get hopefully excited because you're going to be able to do something about it and reverse this whole process. So you can see wild fauna half. Now they're down to 40 million metric tons. The livestock to feed those humans is 1,000 million or 1 billion metric tons of food. Most of that food's genetically modified, corn and soy, which is raping and pillaging all of our environment. You're doing Dr. Schleich. Okay, so now we're going to go a little bit into some detail. Livestock, because they're relatively young, so usually in a CAFO, concentrated animal feeding organization, they usually let the cow go to about 12 months, and then they slaughter it. And then if it's grass-fed, what's going to happen is it's going to let it go to maybe 20, 22 months and slaughter it. So the lifespan of all the animals that we choose to eat is usually in the first couple years of life. So they're eating at a rate 5 times greater than pound for pound than humans. So this 1 billion pounds of livestock requires a total of 2 billion pounds of feed per year. Okay, what's the reason for species extinction? These 200, every 24 hours, 200, that's crazy. Loss of habitat, introduction of invasive species, that would be cows. So every year we slaughter 39 million cows for consumption in the United States alone. And we're going to show you why this is totally unsustainable. Over-harvesting, so the ocean. 90%, Leaf talked about over-harvesting of fish in the ocean. Over 90% of all the fish stock in the world are near like collapse or extinction. That's crazy. How many people have seen Cowspiracy? Not you. Good. So you got to see Cowspiracy. If you haven't seen it, I've seen it probably 40 times now, and there's some nice clips. I've reduced it down so that you could swallow it in a little chunk. Okay, this is Buckminster Fuller. Never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change things, create a new one that makes the old one obsolete. Very good observation. Okay, in the past, we've done things a certain way. So we're going to talk about how many people know Silas Rao. No, get your hand down. Silas Rao wrote the book called Carbon Yoga. That's the most important book that you could read in your lifetime. So you write that down, Carbon Yoga, paperback. You could probably read it in a couple of days. Very, very important because he ties everything in together, which to me is like amazing. And he's done a lot of work in the field. He's from India, and I'm going to tell a little bit of his story, but I can't go into stories because we don't have time. Okay, this is what we've done. Done bloodletting in the past. We've killed each other for food, other people's spouses, chopped down forests, exhumed stuff out of the ground, uranium, coal, diamonds, enslaved people, eaten other animals for food. Okay? That's what we've done in our past. And this is where we've come to, 200 species extinct every day. So let's talk about water usage. Okay? How many people know about the Ogallala water aquifer? Good. So it's made up of about 8 states. And how many people have seen the movie about the Dust Bowl? They did a documentary on the Dust Bowl. Very important movie. Talks about what we did to the land And from 1930 to 1939, hundreds of thousands of people moved to California because they basically didn't have any water. So the Ogallala water aquifer supplies water to the breadbasket of the United States. It's taken thousands and thousands of years to create, and we're down to less than 20% right now. There was a wonderful article in the National Geographic. It was like a 40-page article about it. And it's like, oh, this is not a good thing. And the main reason why it's getting drained is to feed cows, all that food that you saw. The billions of pounds of genetically modified corn and soy. Cape Town. Last April, Cape Town they had day 0. They were running out of water, fresh water. First major city in the world to run out of fresh water. But they didn't. Well, that's another story. But basically, in Cape Town, they reduced the amount of water that people could consume on a daily basis to 50 liters a day. So about 12 gallons a day for everything that you do. And they stopped that crisis. But the crisis is still coming, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Okay, this is water usage of various foods. We can't go into much detail. We had someone who gave this talk before. They said, how can an egg require 70 gallons of water? You look it up. Between 52 and 70 gallons. Soft drink, 50 gallons of water to process. Broccoli, 66. Cantaloupe. Brown rice, 256. I didn't put it on here, but almonds are 377 because they got a bad rap. But almonds give you 6 times more protein than a steak with the same amount of water. Okay, now here are the big hitters for water usage. Chicken, 850 gallons per pound. Milk, 900 gallons of water for 1 gallon. Cheese, 1,400 gallons per pound. Pork and your bacon, 1,630 gallons. Beef, 2,500 gallons of water. And cows that are for dairy cows that eventually get slaughtered, used for beef, 5,000 gallons of water. Okay, so now this is a little video clip from Cowspiracy, and this is a chief water official being asked, what do you think about the water footprint of animal agriculture? And his response,
I think that the water footprint of animal husbandry is greater than other activities. There's no ifs, and, or buts about it.
That would be really powerful, just rather than waiting till we're in a drought. What do you think about just starting now, and whoever's in charge of the Save Our Water, hey, let's start encouraging people to eat less meat now, because these studies are coming out.
I don't think that'll happen.
Why?
I don't think that'll happen.
Why?
Why? Anyway, this goes on for several minutes. Okay, water. More than half of all the water used in the USA is used in some way or another to raise livestock. Yet only 5% is used to grow plant foods directly consumed by humans. We talk about sustainability of food. I mean, just use common logic. To make a cow that's 1,200 pounds and to feed that cow all of that water and all of that grain is a very inefficient system. Do you realize that 97% of the calories that go into feeding a cow, humans get 3 calories out of it? That's like the most inefficient system you could ever come up with. How about our rainforests? Okay? How about our rainforests? What's happening to them? And when you do all of the math, so this is a video clip from Cowspiracy about cutting down the rainforest.
Perhaps the only other ecosystem that is
pretty
being
loud.
destroyed at such a rapid rate are the world's rainforests. Our global rainforests are essentially the planet's lungs. They breathe in CO2 and exhale oxygen. An acre of rainforest is cleared every second, and the leading cause is to graze animals and grow their feed crops. That is essentially an entire football field cleared every single second.
The executive director of the Rainforest Action Network was asked the question, what is the leading cause of deforestation in the world?
Human intervention into rainforests is the leading cause. And so it's either for logging or it's for agribusiness.
But on their website, I was shocked to find cattle was not included as one of their 4 main key issues. Instead, they focused on palm, pulp and paper, coal, and tar sands. How could they not have the leading cause of rainforest destruction? I had to wonder, why focus on fossil fuels and not cattle?
Is it more fossil fuels or is it more animal agriculture?
I don't know why we would ever do a one or the other.
I'm just wondering, what more is it?
I don't necessarily know what it is.
How could the executive director of Rainforest Action Network not know what the leading cause is of deforestation? Same question for the executive director for Amazon Watch.
Immediately went to Amazon Watch to see if they would say what the leading cause of rainforest destruction truly is.
The most biologically and culturally diverse place on the planet is under massive attack right now. The Amazon rainforest itself could be gone in the matter of the next 10 years.
What is the leading cause of rainforest destruction?
It's hard to say what is the leading cause of deforestation of the Amazon because they're all destructive: oil and gas, mining, dams, agriculture. But in terms of land use, in terms of the amount of land that is destroyed by I think it would definitely be agriculture. Unfortunately, one of the biggest causes of deforestation, definitely in the Brazilian Amazon, is agribusiness, cattle grazing and soy production in particular.
All genetically modified, of course.
The main cause of deforestation, and people who were standing up against the lobbyists and the interests, the special interests, the cattle industry, the agribusiness industry, what was happening to them? A lot of people who were speaking out got killed. And look at Dorothy Stang, the nun who lived out in Pará, who was killed.
Sister Dorothy Stang was a U.S.-born nun living in the heart of the Brazilian rainforest. Her life's work was to protect the Amazon. She spoke out openly against the destruction of rainforests from cattle ranching for years. Walking home one night, she was brutally gunned down at point-blank range by a hired gun from the cattle industry.
She was one of hundreds of people that have been murdered, basically, because of speaking out against all of the cutting down of the trees for agribusiness. Agribusiness is basically cows. Carbon Yoga, this is the book I mentioned, The Vegan Metamorphosis, Silas Rao. His life work is to reverse what we have done and to restore forests. And he came up with this wonderful program to basically return half of all the land back to the animals. So that slide presentation earlier that showed the biomass, that comes from Dr. Rao. Dr. Rao is responsible for the internet working as fast as it does today. He's a brilliant scientist who in 2005 saw Al Gore give his talk, Inconvenient Truth, and immediately quit his job and went to work for Al Gore. A few months into it, he realized that no one was talking about animal agriculture and that being the #1 effect of causing global greenhouse gases. And when he called Al Gore up to tell him, like, we got to talk about the animals, Al Gore said, they're already confused. Don't say anything more about that. Just keep it simple. And it was like, so he quit Al Gore. He formed climatehealers.com. And you can go in there. Reorienting the human diet away from animal foods constitutes the largest opportunity for reforestation efforts to heal climate and the planet. What about free-ranging grass-fed cows? Well, that's a great question. Well, let's take a little look and see what happens with grass-fed cows. Well, it turns out that free-ranging cows are actually worse for the environment because they use more resources. A cow that's grass-fed is not harvested until 2 years later rather than 1 year. So it uses more resources, water, feed, etc. Pasture-raised cows require 1.5 to 30 acres of land. That's a lot of land. Pasture-raised pigs need 1 to 5 acres of land. Since free-ranging cows are slaughtered almost a year later than CAFOs. So CAFOs, concentrated animal feedlots, are actually a much more efficient way, if you want to eat beef, of raising beef. More wild animals displaced. So that was the first slides you saw about wild animals basically going extinct because of our requirement to eat meat, or what we think is a requirement. Okay, so this is a little video clip from Cowspiracy about, let's say in the United States we wanted to do grass-fed cows and eat them for our meat. The average American eats 206 pounds of red meat per year.
Currently, nearly half of all United States land is already dedicated to animal agriculture. If we were to switch over to grass-fed beef, it would require clearing every square inch of the United States, up into Canada, all of Central America, and well into South America. And this is just to feed the United States' demand on meat. But that figure doesn't even take into consideration that much of that land isn't suited to graze livestock. We would have to convert all mountain ranges to grassland, clear ancient forests and national parks to grazing, and demolish every city just to make room to graze cows.
What about wildlife?
If anyone cares about wild horses and wildlife and public lands and the environment, you can't ignore the livestock, the impact, the negative impact that livestock grazing is having on our public lands in the West.
This is Dr. Oppenlander giving a little talk in one of his lectures about a place in Australia that was growing grass-fed beef.
Now, isn't this a beautiful countryside scene? Beautiful blue skies and green grass and rolling hills. This happens to be in the northeast section of Victoria, Australia, where I was researching the ecological effects of their food choices. And instead of seeing beautiful blue skies or green grass, I like taking a closer look at things like this. So here's what I see in this photo. I see this: depletion of land, air, food, water, inefficient use of our resources. It's happening here as quickly as anywhere else in the world. And I also see something else, which is the main reason I visited this specific area to research. I mean, lock in this area, or this view, for just a moment as we advance. We're going to leave this area. We're going to just get out of the car and go down the road a few hundred yards and get off our bikes. And this is what we see. This 1,000-year-old forest is what that cattle ranch used to be. And it was the home to numerous insects, plants, and animals. There are 3 different types of eucalyptus trees growing here, and one animal in particular that I was looking for, which is now endangered due to destroying its home. It's this little guy. All of his family members were killed. Thousands are each year. He now lives in a small, remote rescue area in that forest, and he represents species everywhere on our planet that are being devastated by cattle and other livestock operations on land, fishing in our oceans, lack of awareness about food choice, and politics. In fact, koalas are predicted to become extinct in just 20 years. It's quite sad, and that's what I see in this view, whether it's in Australia or in the United States or anywhere else in the world.
So this, at the end of this little video clip, is really, this comes from Cowspiracy, is an important little statement that I want to stress.
This is what a few thousand to a million-year-old rainforest now looks like, because the world's food priorities are with eating livestock, not with being stewards of other living things, as we should be. This is the sad result. Soon grass, pasture, and cattle will follow this in, usually erosion, desertification, and localized climate change as well. If you choose to eat livestock here in the US or anywhere else, you're going to be supporting this destruction by fueling the global demand for meat.
Fueling the global demand for meat. So you eat a free-ranging grass-fed cow here in the US, you are essentially killing people in Africa. And I have a slide later on that shows you the average person. 80% of the population in the world lives on less than $10 a day. So, you know, yes, we can eat beef over here. And when we get to the nutrition side, I'm going to present, like, hands down, what the most ideal diet is going to be, which excludes all animals and all fish. Okay, what about land use? 45% of land on Earth is used to raise animals. 5% to grow plants consumed directly by humans. It's estimated that only 3% of the calories that cows consume are translated into calories that people can consume through meat. And those calories come with it chock full of environmental toxicants. So fish, as well as red meat, as well as chicken, are loaded with toxicants. And undeniably, that humans have caused this problem. Michael Pollan, which was mentioned by Leif, thank you for mentioning him. He's written a number of books, best-selling author, The Omnivore's Dilemma. When asked whether we might stop eating meat altogether, he responds.
I don't know that we'll completely stop. I think that the amount of meat eaten will decline. There's no way to support 9 ounces per person per day, which is what Americans are eating now. If the Chinese alone decide they want to eat that much, and they've decided they want to eat that much, we just can't. We don't have enough world to produce the grain to generate that much meat. I think a plant-based diet is the most sustainable. Per meat?
And including dairy, like.
Yeah, I don't think I don't know enough. But yeah, it would be on the order of a couple ounces a week. It's not going to be the way we're eating it now. We're gorging on meat. We're eating huge amounts.
And does that include cheese too? Like
Yeah.
2 ounces total?
Yeah, cheese and milk.
2 ounces a week. Only 2 ounces a week seem like nothing.
Exactly. What's the point? So you're going to sacrifice the entire environment of the earth so you can have 2 ounces. Now, if you want to just feed rich people meat, go ahead, do that. But the rest of the population of the world will expire. So this is that chart I was telling you about. 80% of the world lives on less than $10 a day. That's like, wow, that's kind of a startling thing to realize. So as caregivers for the rest of the planet and the rest of our fellow human species, we need to keep that into consideration when we're choosing our foods. What about greenhouse gases? In 2006, the world was shocked to hear that one of the leading causes of greenhouse gases was eating hamburgers and steaks. And they guesstimated that 18% came from livestock, more than the entire transportation sector combined. All trucks, trains, cars, boats, planes. However, in 2009, a critical review done by Robert Goodland and Jeff Anhang, world environmental specialists from the World Bank Group, they spent their entire lives studying the environment. Livestock was actually responsible for 51%, and that's actually conservative. So estimates are much higher. We don't have time to go into the details in this, but if you get that book, Sustainable Nutrition, Food Choice and Sustainable Nutrition, you will read in vivid details all about this. Carbon footprint by diet. You can see high meat diet, 15.8 pounds of CO2 compared to a vegan, which is 2.5 times less. So what about fish?
Lapse. The UN reported that 3/4 of the world's fisheries are overexploited, fully exploited, or significantly depleted due to overfishing.
The oceans are under siege like never before, and marine environments are in trouble. And if we don't wake up and do something about it, we're going to see fishless oceans by the year 2048. That's the prediction from scientists.
The fact that when people look at fishing, sometimes they're only looking at the fact of the animals who are actually consumed by humans, and we're not necessarily looking at all the animals who are caught in the drift nets, all the other animals who are killed in the industry.
We're at over 28 billion animals were pulled out of the ocean last year. They're not ever given a chance to recover. They can't recover. They don't multiply that quickly. They don't, they don't come back. We're not giving them an opportunity.
The way fishing is done today to feed the demand for 90 million tons of fish is primarily through massive fish nets. For every single pound of fish caught, there's up to 5 pounds of untargeted species trapped, such as dolphins, whales, sea turtles, and sharks, known as bykill. If we were to imagine this same sort of practice happening on the African savanna, targeting gazelle, but in the process scooping up every single lion, giraffe, ostrich, and elephant, nobody would stand for it. Yet, this is what is happening in our oceans every single day.
Okay, what about fish farms?
Well, no worries. Not to worry at all, because now we have fish farms. 49% of all fish consumed worldwide are produced from aquaculture, which is growing faster than any other food sector. One reason for this tremendous growth is the very false illusion of environmentalism. Asia now produces 91% of all farmed fish in the world. China produces 60%. Shrimp, tilapia, carp, with a vast majority of operations being completely unregulated. The U.S. imported over 6 million tons of seafood in 2012, and half of those imports were from these unregulated farms. Here we have another interesting idea where fish are caught in our already ravaged oceans to feed other fish produced on factory fish farms, sometimes at a ratio of 20:1 in the form of fish, fish meal, fish oil. 88% of all fish oil and 56% of all fish meal now produced in the world is given to these fish farms.
So I think Leif addressed that about feeding fish to other fish, and it's like, that's just crazy. Okay, what about toxicants in our environment? How many people have read The Coming Plague by Laurie Garrett? Good, well read over there. She came and spoke at Providence about 15 years ago after she came out with this book. And it was startling to see that in 2009, 35 million pounds of antibiotics were used in the United States. Of these 35 million, 80% or 28 million were used in livestock. Ooh, that's not good. Okay, in 2011, 180 million pounds of glyphosate, that's Roundup Ready, was used in the U.S. mostly for feed crops for livestock. Since 1974, 3.5 billion pounds of glyphosate has been used in agriculture. So there's a whole bunch of implications of the microbiome because glyphosate can affect that. And how many people know who Zach Bush is? He's a medical doctor. He's from, not you guys. Anyway, write down Zach Bush podcast, Rich Roll. And I think is one of the great interviews ever, and just discusses all of the clinical implications of anxiety, depression, mood disorders related to glyphosate. Okay, what about glyphosate? Roundup Ready. It's toxic. It interferes with the production of some essential amino acids. It's involved in the dead zones. So one of the largest dead zones in the world is in the Gulf of Mexico because of all the animal agricultural nitrogenous waste that goes down the Mississippi along with the glyphosate and along with the antibiotics. When you give an antibiotic to a human or an animal, they pee it into the water, it goes into our water supply and kills all the things in the water. One spraying of land with glyphosate, which they do on all wheat crops, or most wheat crops if they're not organic, will kill 50% of all of the earthworms in the soil. Let me tell you, if you kill the earthworms, that's not a good thing. Soil needs earthworms. Glyphosate and celiac disease, we don't have time to get into that, but there's a very interesting correlation with glyphosate and autoimmune disease. What about foodborne illnesses? 48 million Americans contract foodborne illnesses each year, with the vast majority of cases going unreported. Over 3,000 people die each year of foodborne illnesses. Foodborne illnesses almost always originate from animal sources. E. coli, whatever organisms that you want to, Shigella, Salmonella, etc. So this is a little video clip about, what about Meatless Mondays?
But what if people just ate less animal products, like going meatless on Mondays?
You can't be an environmentalist and eat animal products, period. Kid yourself if you want. If you want to feed your addiction, so be it. But don't call yourself an environmentalist.
That's Howard Lehman. He was one of the largest ranchers in Montana, which I practiced for 5 years back in the time. And so this next video clip is Dr. Oppenlander talking about Hawaii, and Hawaii as a microcosm for the whole Earth. So it's a pretty fascinating little clip here. So pay close attention.
Well, how many of you have visited Hawaii? Great. Great. It's a beautiful state, isn't it? And yes, it's a beautiful state, but from a sustainability standpoint, it's a mess. Hawaii can't grow enough food for its own human population of 1 million people, so it imports over 90% of its food at a tune of $3 billion per year. That's what Hawaii's doing. But looking at this more closely, 83% of their agricultural land in Hawaii isn't used to grow food. 83% of their agricultural land isn't growing food. It's used for grazing cattle, which then produces less than 40 pounds of meat, something they call food, less than 40 pounds of meat per acre used. Their second largest use of land is for producing Roundup-ready GMO seeds by Monsanto and DuPont, who have taken over 4 of Hawaii's islands now. 98% of those seeds that are produced in Hawaii are used for feed crops for livestock back here on the mainland. So the amount of land in Hawaii that's used for animal agriculture is nearly 800,000 acres. That's 50 times more land than what's being used to grow plants for direct human consumption in their state.
Okay, so I spent over 40 years of my life studying nutrition, and actually probably longer than that because my mom was a health food nut. And, you know, we grew up, we ate meat probably 2 or 3 times a day, never thought anything of it. Eventually, when I went to nutrition school, became vegetarian at age 19 because of the toxicants in meat and the fact that one of the great correlations of cardiovascular disease, the largest killer of us humans, is related to what was found in those meats. So how long should we live? So I've been to 1 blue zone, and I will go to all 5 of the blue zones. I've met with Dan Buettner, and I've met with Walter Longo. Walter Longo wrote the book called The Longevity Diet. And Dr. Chung and I had a chance to go meet with him and see the first international conference on longevity, calorie restriction, and the ideal diet. And it was a pretty fascinating mix of people. So the question is, how long should we live? Well, the oldest person to ever live that we have papers documented is Jeanne Louise Calment. She lived 122 and a half, and she was in Arles. When she was 120, she said, "I have 1 wrinkle and I am sitting on it." She drank a glass of port after her meals at night, and she actually even smoked. I don't know if she inhaled, but, you know, and the only reason why she stopped smoking was because she couldn't see the cigarette being lit, and she was afraid of burning herself alive. So she stopped just because of those concerns. Okay, so this was in the National Geographic in 2005. This was the very beginning. So how many people have read the Okinawa Program? 1. All right, so Okinawa Program, another one of the most important books that you could read. I had a chance to meet with one of the authors, Bradley Wilcox, and this was an article from Dan Buettner that talked about, well, why do these people live a long time? So in the book, The Longevity Diet by Walter Longo, he discusses in vivid detail, like, what is the ideal diet and how do we determine that? Well, it makes sense. Like, who lives the longest on the planet and what are they doing? Copy what they're doing. So demographers, statisticians, and health records were all gone together, and these are the 5 places in the world: Icaria in Sardinia, which are in the Mediterranean, Okinawa, Costa Rica, and Loma Linda. Is that correct? Okay, so that's me with Panchita. This is in the Costa Rica blue zone of Nicoya. She's 109 here. And so she walked every day into town for about 7 miles each way in the snow. Well, only kidding. This is Costa Rica. It's pretty calm over there in terms of the weather-wise. So this is Panchita dancing on one of these parties at 109. Moving pretty good. I want to be able to move like that when I'm 109. So she made it to 110. I drew her blood at 110. She passed away 2 weeks after that, hopefully not from drawing her blood. So I studied the biochemistry of these centenarians. Again, these are the highest centenarian populations in the world. So what do all the blue zones have in common? So it just makes sense. Let's see what they do. What is the ideal diet for humans? Well, we've got to keep into consideration the blue zones and keep into consideration your biochemistry. So let's take a look. Carbohydrate consumption. You can see on the graph over there, 85% of calories that the Okinawans eat come from carbohydrates. 68, 65, 57, 37. I think that's wrong. I challenge that statistic, that one, that the Akkadians only consume 37% of their calories from carbohydrate. So according to some people, a lot of their fat calories basically come from olive oil, which is where the Mediterranean diet gets its reputation from, because they are in the Mediterranean. So that's me and Dan Buettner at the conference in Washington, D.C. An excellent book to read, has some fun stories in there. So what's the optimal breakdown nutrition-wise? Carbohydrates, there's no blue zones that eat a ketogenic or Paleolithic diet. I actually introduced the Paleolithic diet right here in school back in 1988 when I started teaching. And it's interesting to analyze what those people ate back in the day and to see how it got misinterpreted from the original book that came out, the Paleolithic prescription. All right, so protein, 10 to 20% of total calories. We're going to go through a little time. I already can see I'm running out of time, which is a bummer. I wanted to talk specifically about protein and how protein and Leaf made a statement about that. We need to eat less protein, not more protein. We are already way over consuming the amount of protein that we require. Fats, 10 to 20% of total calories. Fats, for a number of reasons, increase the likelihood of cardiovascular disease, dementia, and diabetes, blocking those insulin receptors. The big thing that we need to know about is omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-3 fatty acids, everyone thinks about fish, cold water fish in particular. So one of the things about fish that are in fish farms is usually the temperature of the water is not as cold. Their omega-3 profile is much less. But there's other problems with those fish. So in Paleolithic days, we got pretty much most of our omega-3 oils from plants. And that's how the Mediterranean diet got their omega-3 fatty acids, from plants, wild plants. We only eat 1/2% of all edible plant food on the planet. 1/2%. We got a long ways to go. A lot of food. Okay, hara-hachibu. Hara-hachibu is eat till you're 80% full. So that's the Okinawans. Every time that they eat in the morning and at night and for lunch, they say hara-hachibu. I usually do hara-hachibu times 2. So I'm an American. I like to pig out. There's a place on Hawthorne, Lardo's. Pig out. There's a big sign. Who goes to a place called Pig Out? I mean, I pig out, but I don't want to go to a place called Pig Out. There's Walter Longo. That's our conference down in Los Angeles about the longevity diet. Okay, fiber. That's probably one of the most important things that you need to look for that you can take out of this lecture. You need to shoot for at least 80 grams of fiber, which is close to impossible if you're including animal products. All animal products have 0 amount of fiber in them. When we talk about microbiome, we use fiber to make short-chain fatty acids that stimulate the growth of beneficial bacteria. I'm going to talk about in a little bit. Potassium, also critically important, 6 to 10 grams a day. Flavonoids, ellagic acid, which is compounds found specifically in plants. Soybeans, black beans, red beans, if tolerated. Again, we don't have time to go over this. Flavonoids. So one of my nicknames was Dr. Flavonoid when I taught nutrition here in school. Flavonoids come from plants. When plants want to protect themselves, they make flavonoids. If you eat the plants, now you get the same protective substances that you can get. Now, fish do have some flavonoids. For example, salmon, the color of salmon comes from astaxanthin. But where does the salmon get that color from? It gets it from algae. How much algae do people eat in the United States? Not a whole lot. So later today, you're going to hear a talk. Diana Rogers is going to talk about protein. She's going to compare beans together with red meat. Well, let's go spirulina and red meat one-on-one. Take a look at the amount of protein that you're going to get from spirulina, much higher. But again, we don't want to eat all this protein. This is unnecessary. All right, we're going to have to skip some of this stuff here, sorry. So these are compounds, again, found in plant foods. If you can make it to the professional lecture, maybe you can sneak in there, blah, blah, blah. I'll talk about that. Let's talk about protein and protein requirements. So risk factors in atherosclerosis, #1 killer in the U.S. and in the world, but Alzheimer's disease is rapidly catching up. That's a big problem. One of the biggest correlations in Alzheimer's disease and also with cardiovascular disease is the amount of animal protein. So this is a book that was written by Maria Linder, a brilliant biochemist genius who wrote Nutritional Biochemistry and Metabolism with Clinical Implications. I don't recommend you getting that book unless you really want to get into the biochemistry, but she is brilliant. Okay, Proteinaholic. How many people have read this book by Garth Davis? Garth Davis is a medical doctor, has a bariatric center in Texas, and talks about protein and our obsession with just eating all of this protein. Unnecessary. We're going to talk about the RDAs about protein. How to calculate your protein intake. So basically what you do is you take a person, you take 100 people, you make them protein deficient. And protein, what's in protein is nitrogen. So you pee nitrogen out, you sweat nitrogen out, or you poop nitrogen out. So you measure how much of that nitrogen goes out, and then you gradually increase in a protein deficient person the amount of protein that they consume. Eventually you get to the point where the amount of nitrogen that's going out is coming in at the same exact rate, and that's your equilibrium. That's how much protein that you would require. Now, to make the RDAs, or the daily value intake, they've increased that by 2 standard deviations. And so basically a 154-pound male will get about 22 grams of protein is how much they require. But we want to cover 97.5% of the population, and to do that, we do 2 standard deviations, and that's how we get our value of 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. But we know from many places in the world where people don't have as much food, don't have as much protein, they do perfectly fine with much less. In fact, the Okinawas for over 50 years, 80% of their calories came from sweet potato or emo. And they weren't protein deficient, and they lived longer than anyone in the world. I want to do what they're doing. A major weightlifting, muscle-building person, their protein requirement goes up by about 10%. So not a whole lot. So maybe 1 gram per kilogram body weight. So that's not very hard to get. And I have an example, which we're going to have to whip through, of a diet that consists of fairly high amount of protein. So a diet consisting of only 20 to 25 grams of protein daily, 3% of total calories. How much protein does breast milk have, which is the perfect food for human babies? 5%. Compare that to cow's milk, 3 times as much protein, because humans are designed to feed your spinal tumor when you're a baby, your brain, spinal growth at the end of your spinal cord. You need fat, you don't need protein. Medical personnel describe these people. This was a study of population of New Guinea, and this was by Dennis Burkitt. Dennis Burkitt's famous for his research on doing fiber intake, and no cardiovascular disease, no diabetes, no diverticuli, no colitis, no ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease. It's like, what are those people doing that we're doing that's different? And one of the things is that Dennis Burkitt found, and these are some of the people of that local tribe that they studied. They don't look protein deficient to me. They might be a little smaller, but heck, they're looking pretty buff to me. I'll take that body shape anytime. So let's talk about fiber. This is a page out of my textbook. We're going to have a book signing later on in the day, and you can come up and you can take a look at one of my textbooks. It's a book that we use to teach nutrition here at school for over 20 years, Medical Nutrition for Marz. And this is just an example of fiber found in foods. And again, your goal is to try to get 80 grams a day. That's a lot of fiber. So if you haven't measured your fiber intake for a day, I urge you to practice this. Meat, fish, dairy, eggs, all devoid of fiber, have very little in the way of flavonoids. So optimal nutrition. What about iron? So we talk about vegans as being deficient in iron. Well, the number one genetic defect in our genome is for hemochromatosis. Hemochromatosis is a condition where we store extra amounts of iron. So too much iron is actually not good for you. It increases your risk of diabetes, heart disease, cancer, inflammation, etc., etc. So the whole talk about iron is way overdone. Now, I definitely admit that there's a lot of people that have iron deficiency. And those people need to be attended, and we don't have time to get into the detail about checking percent transferrin saturation and mean cell volume, but oftentimes iron is inappropriately prescribed for people. Iron deficiency can be a problem, however, in our culture it also may be killing us. So one thing to take out, should ask your physician to make sure you check your iron body stores, percent transferrin saturation, and ferritin. Okay, so this is out of Brenda Davis' lecture she did at VegFest this last year. We're associated with increased amount of cancers, oxidative stress, and Alzheimer's disease would be included in that. So hemochromatosis is the most common genetic defect in our genome. So when we actually measure iron levels in vegetarians or vegans, they may have lower tissue levels, which is good. They don't have lower levels of anemia. Okay, let's talk about vitamin B12 briefly. So vitamin B12 is sometimes the nutrient that vegans are deficient in, and that there's no sources of vitamin B12 that come from plants. Wrong. And this is a little stickler note, but I've done a lot of research on this. But blue-green algae actually has a ton of activated vitamin B12. So there's a company, I don't have any vested interests in them, Nutrix from Hawaii. They make spirulina, and a couple of tablespoons of spirulina has 20 micrograms of B12, more than most animal sources. So the way that we get B12 is from bacteria. And the animals that have bacteria, which all animals have lots of bacteria, that's where the B12 is actually coming from. So this is just a study. We're going to have to skip over that. Talks about levels of B12 in vegans. Spirulina platensis has been shown to have a very significant amount of activated B12. Now, if you want to rely on that as a complete vegan for your B12 source, you need to measure something called methylmalonic acid and serum B12 to make sure indeed that you're not deficient. So you should be supervised. We recommend all vegans take a vitamin B12 supplement. We talked about this earlier. We only eat 0.5% of all edible food on the planet. We have enough food worldwide to feed 12 billion people right now. So the latest census is we have 7.7 billion people on the planet. So that is, I got to get that sticker off that avocado there. Probably the next presentation that'll come off. So that is what I would say is part of the top 20 foods in the world to eat. And you can see those are purple sweet potatoes in the middle, some nuts and seeds. So carbohydrates are the source of life for humans. So another excellent book to have is Foods to Fight Cancer by Gingras and Bellevue. Beautiful colored pages in there. Talks about all flavonoids that are found in foods and different constituents like Cowspiracy resinol, which I mentioned earlier briefly when we passed that. So this is an example of an ideal meal that you could eat for breakfast. So I give this to my patients. This is my buckwheat cereal. In fact, someone didn't know how to make it, so I'm actually going to make it for them and bring it to their house to feed to their young kid, who right now is living on French fries and burgers. And buckwheat cereal, so buckwheat is one of the gluten-free grains that we have. It's not really a grain, actually. It's seed. And you cook buckwheat with some blueberries and currants. I like to add pomegranates. Pomegranates are protective against all kinds of things. Flax seeds, really high in fiber. And you can see the content. Do I have? This is a veggie broth soup that I constructed from Dr. Pablo Arola. It's got sweet potatoes, one of the top 20 foods in the world to eat, beet greens. We need to change how we see foods such as dandelions. Like now you can buy dandelions in the store, which is really good. Dandelions are super high in flavonoids and carotenoids. Carotenoids are what you need. How many people know the company Nu Skin? They make a little device that you can actually measure how much carotenoid is actually in your tissue. And it tells you if you're like in jeopardy of getting cancer or whatever. So a very useful tool, but really we want to try to get as much flavonoids and carotenoids as possible. So this is the breakdown of these particular 2 meals. So I actually recommend only eating twice a day. Hara hachibu. And periodic fasting, that is at least 5 days, anywhere from 2 to 4 times a year. That's a whole nother lecture. So those 2 meals that I just presented give you 65 grams of protein, more than sufficient for the average person in the United States, way more sufficient. Potassium, almost 6,000 milligrams. Fat, 17.5%, perfect. Fiber, 67.5 grams. And you're only getting a total of 1,690 calories. This is how we should be eating. This is the ideal diet. Magnesium, they also called me Dr. Magnesium, 867 milligrams. The average person, 70% of people in the U.S. don't even meet the RDA for magnesium, which is around 350 for males and 280 for females. Carotenoids, 40,000 units of carotenoids. That's what you want to protect you against Alzheimer's, cancer, heart disease, damage to your blood vessels. Okay, let's say you want some more calories and you want a dessert. So I came up with this banana chocolate dessert. All of a sudden now you got 92 grams of protein, 24% fat, still in the close to ideal range. Fiber, 91 grams of fiber, and magnesium, 1,400, off the charts, and carotenoids, 40,000 units. Okay, so you're going to have to look at these by yourself. And I think we have a handout for you electronically, top 20 foods in the world to eat, and this is on there. We won't have time to get into details. Walter Willett, one of the world's expert in nutrition from Harvard University, said if you step back and look at the data, the optimal amount of red meat you should eat should be 0. That includes pork and beef. That's my textbook. These are a couple of great books. Michael Murray, which possibly may be related to me. We're going to do a family tree to see because my grandmother was a Murray. So, Healing Foods and the Healing Power of Foods. Summary and conclusion. How can we sustainably and optimal health into our culture? So this is Greta Thunberg. How many people know Greta? She's famous. She's famous because she gave a talk at the climate talks and in Poland last year, and this is a little clip from her.
Quietly and unmistakably, the most powerful thing that someone can do.
Sorry, not yet.
No other lifestyle choice has a farther-reaching and more profoundly positive impact on the planet and all life on Earth than choosing to stop consuming animals and live a vegan lifestyle.
You don't think we couldn't solve this problem in a heartbeat? I'll tell you what. All we would need is for the environmentalists to live what they profess and we'd be on a new course in the world.
We will not succeed until we stop animal agriculture. And by succeed, I mean we will not save ecosystems to the extent necessary. We will not have enough food for people around the planet. We will not stop global warming. We will not stop pollution and the dead zones that run off all the fields of corn and soy that are grown to feed livestock. And we will not stop the hunting of wolves and other predators.
Okay, Greta. What happened? Greta? Okay. It's supposed to come on. Maybe we'll manually. Greta!
My name is Greta Thunberg. I am 15 years old and I'm from Sweden. I speak on behalf of climate justice now. Many people say that Sweden is just a small country and it doesn't matter what we do. But I've learned that you are never too small to make a difference. And if a few children can get headlines all over the world just by not going to school, then imagine what we could all do together if we really wanted to. You only talk about moving forward with the same bad ideas that got us into this mess, even when the only sensible thing to do is pull the emergency brake. It is the sufferings of the many which pay for the luxuries of the few. The year 2078, I will celebrate my 75th birthday. If I have children, maybe they will spend that day with me. Maybe they will ask me about you. Maybe they will ask why you didn't do anything while there still was time to act. You say you love your children above all else, and yet you are stealing their future in front of their very eyes. We cannot solve a crisis without treating it as a crisis. We have not come here to beg world leaders to care. You have ignored us in the past and you will ignore us again. We have run out of excuses and we are running out of time. We have come here to let you know that change is coming, whether you like it or not. The real power belongs to the people. Thank you.
She drove an electric car to this conference because she refused to fly. They want to fly her all over the world to speak, but she refuses because she doesn't want to get on a plane. She converted herself into complete veganism and then her whole entire family because she was concerned about what was happening to our world situation. Nothing will benefit human health and increase chances for survival of life on Earth as much as the evolution to a vegetarian diet. Albert Einstein, he was a pretty smart dude. I would listen to him more than anyone else. Thank you for your attention, and thanks. Pass the word, please.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Marz.